The fallow meadows beneath you are a different kind of silence. The train travels from Jena to Gera, and the fields beside you aren't cultivated, aren't maintained, aren't prepared for any particular purpose. They're simply there, wild and untamed, pierced by autumn light like nothing else could pierce them. It's a golden light, a hard light, a light that knows no mercy and hides no blemish. Under this light, the fallow meadows look like the remains of something older, something forgotten. The grasses are tall and dry now, yellow and brown from the first hard frosts of early autumn. They stand upright, like tiny soldiers in an endless army, all roughly the same height, all the same precise distance apart, creating a natural order that no human designer could have planned. There's a wild rhythm in this apparent disorder, a deeply natural rhythm that wasn't planned by humans, but is simply what happens when nature is left entirely alone, allowed to grow as it will. The train rattles past at considerable speed, and the grasses sway and bend gently in the powerful air current the train creates as it moves. It's as if the train is making the meadow breathe again, as if it's breathing life into it, breathing a temporary animation into something that seems to be missing such vitality in this late season. You lean closer to the window and try to look into the depth of the meadow. There are layers here, depth of field, a three-dimensionality that surprises you. The grasses in the foreground are crystal clear under the autumn light, each single blade visible, each blade casting its own small shadow on the blade beside it. The structure of the meadow becomes visible, its complexity, something you hadn't noticed before. But the deeper you look, the more blurred the image becomes, the less you can distinguish individual blades. The meadow becomes a textured surface, a tapestry of gold and brown and dark grey-green, a landscape in miniature where each color shade means something different. Each variation tells a story. There's something genuinely soothing in this unique perspective, in this subtle blending of near and far, in this intricate mixture of fine detail and broader abstraction. It's precisely like looking at a very fine painting. When you approach it closely, you see the individual brushstrokes clearly. You see the visible artist's work and technique. But when you step back and view it as a whole, you see the complete picture unified. You see the full beauty that emerges organically from the careful combination of all those individual brushstrokes. The meadow is exactly such a painting, a masterpiece drawn continuously by nature itself, by the forces of autumn and the quality of light. Spider webs are everywhere, and each one is covered with frost. These aren't like the silver webs you saw this morning. These are grayish-white, frozen, crystallized. They sparkle under the autumn light like tiny diamonds or pearls someone has scattered across the meadow. It's an impression of abundance, of lavishness, of nature saying that beauty doesn't matter, that beauty is everywhere, even in the smallest things, even at the edges of the meadow, in the spider webs. You try to count how many webs you can see, but the number is too large. It exceeds your ability to count. There are simply too many. The first hoarfrost of the morning still lies on the grasses. It's almost November now, and the nights are cold. This white crystalline coating lies like a thin layer over everything, over each grass blade, over every small leaf, over every small twig still hanging from the wild shrubs. It's like snow, but it isn't snow. It's the breath of autumn that freezes into crystals in the cold. It's the last gift of nature before winter comes and buries everything beneath itself. You notice your breath hitting the window and fogging it. You wipe it away, but a second later it's fogged again. It's as if your body is fighting against the window, trying to stretch out toward the outside, trying to feel the cold air out there. But the window stays firm and hard, and you stay inside, warm and safe, while the world outside is cold and unwelcoming. There's movement in the meadow finally, after all the stillness, after all the silence. A bird, perhaps a raven, perhaps a crow, lands on one of the taller grass tips, and the grass bends under its weight. The bird is black, almost invisible against the gray sky, but there's a shimmering gleam on its feathers, a purple or green gloss, a metallic shine, depending on how the light catches the feathers, depending on how the bird turns its head. The bird pecks quickly, rhythmically, searching for something to eat. Perhaps seeds fallen from the grasses, perhaps small insects still active in this cool weather. Then it takes off, and you can't really tell whether it found anything or not. The train is too fast, and the bird is too fast, and your attention is too divided between the beauty of the meadow and the excitement of seeing a living bird, a living proof that this meadow isn't dead, that it isn't abandoned. But you've caught the impression of a bird searching for food, of a living creature existing in this meadow, even though you could only see it for a second, even though the memory is already beginning to fade as the train carries you on. The landscape gradually flattens out and becomes completely flat as an outstretched hand lying on the earth. The hills that existed at the beginning of your journey grow progressively flatter, grow noticeably smaller in profile, until they gradually become just a plain, until there's only the endless meadow left stretching in all directions. Endless, without variation, without any relief or interruption. That's a fundamentally different kind of beauty altogether, your increasingly tired mind observes. It's the beauty of simplicity itself, of absolute clarity, of unobstructed sight and vision, of the pure purity that only a vast, flat expanse can truly offer. There's no confusion here, no hidden valleys you could peer into, no distant hills beckoning you to climb them. There's only the meadow stretching on and on, the grasses reaching to infinity, the autumn light holding everything in its clear gaze, and you passing through it all, only observing silently, only looking and watching, without acting, without interfering, without changing the meadow even slightly, as it's left entirely to itself, as it continues doing what fallow meadows have done for centuries, what nature does when it's left alone to its own devices. The train begins to slow. There's a subtle sign that Jera is approaching, that the journey is nearing its end. The vibrations change, grow slower, less intense. It's as if the train is waking from a dream, remembering itself, that it must reach Jera. But in this moment between Jenna and Jera, there are still the fallow meadows, the autumn light, the spiderwebs with their hoarfrost, the golden grasses gently swaying in the air current from the train. The sun now stands lower in the sky, lower than at morning, closer to the horizon, closer to evening. The light grows even harder, even colder, even more golden. The shadows grow longer, become lines, become rod-like shapes across the meadow. The grasses cast their shadows on other grasses, and those shadows cast shadows again, until the meadow becomes a complex network of light and darkness, of lighter and darker patches. The fallow meadow becomes a landscape of light and shadow, of gold and black, of contrast and depth, of a complexity your eye can barely follow. It's almost painful, seeing this beauty, this sharpness of autumn light that forgives no fault, that knows no mercy, that leaves no room for ambiguity. And yet, precisely because of this sharpness, it is beautiful. Precisely because the light is hard, because it hides nothing, because it reveals everything. The beauty is real. The beauty is true, incomparable, and pure. Your head grows heavy. The warmth of the carriage, the rhythmic clacking of the wheels, the beauty of the fallow meadows outside, all of it combines into something hypnotic, something that draws you towards sleep. The grasses blur, the spiderwebs become hazy dots, the hoarfrost becomes a memory. The autumn light grows softer, more diffuse, less harsh. The train carries you on, and the fallow meadows slowly say goodbye, disappear behind you as you drift, as your consciousness slowly dissolves into the darkness of sleep. And in this darkness, your sleeping mind thinks, there are still the fallow meadows. There is still the autumn light. There are still the spider webs with their frost, all golden, all sharp, all real, frozen forever in this moment between Jena and Gera. Imagine the train running from Deggendorf to Zwiesel through the Bavarian forest, and you smell something sweet in the air, something not immediately identifiable. It's not sugar, it's not honey, it's not the synthetic vanilla aroma of the modern world. It's the scent of real beeswax floating through the windows like a ghost, like a memory. This is the village of the candle maker, the woman who works with old molds and liquid gold. Her name is Greta, and she's 58, with grey hair that she always wears loose, long down her back. She makes candles from beeswax the way it was once done, the way it's still done in the few workshops that have preserved the old craft, that haven't abandoned it, that have fought against industry. Not the cheap paraffin candles of modern industry that burn quickly and are spent at once, that give you headaches, but real beeswax candles, golden ones that give off pure beeswax sweetness, that glow warmly, that give heat and burn for hours and hours. Winter was the high season for Greta, the best time, the most precious time of the whole year, when everyone wanted candles, when people remembered again that light mattered. Everyone needed them, for warmth, for light, for Christmas, for the dark, long nights of January and February. Her workshop was a small cave of scent and light, a magical place, almost a sacred place that felt like another world, a world industry hadn't reached yet. On the walls hung the old molds, copper or tin, some 100 years old, some older, some from medieval masters who'd burned their craftsmanship into these forms. The scent of beeswax was everywhere, in every corner, permeated the air like an invisible, sweet, golden liquid, like the aroma of heaven itself. Greta worked every day, without exception, even when she was ill, even when her hands ached from yesterday's work. She melted the wax in great copper pots over the old wood stove, and the scent spread like a blessing's smoke through the whole workshop. The wax was expensive, very expensive, frighteningly expensive. Every kilogram was valuable as gold, and she wasted nothing, not a single drop, not a grain. She dipped the wicks into the liquid golden wax again and again, hundreds of times, with the calm of a nun, with the meditation of an artist. With each dip, the candle grew thicker, took shape, became more itself. The old craft was simple but time-consuming, required patience and attention. A good candle needed 30 to 40 dips, sometimes 50, if a particularly thick, long candle was desired, sometimes more. The heat was intense, and Greta's hands were always warm, always slightly reddened, sometimes even burned at the fingertips from tiny spatters of hot wax. She didn't worry about these small injuries. They were the scars of an artist. But when the candle was finished, it gleamed like gold, like real, pure gold, like if the sun had been poured into solid form, and when you lit it, it gave off a scent that no perfumery could ever imitate, that no one could imitate except the bees themselves, those wonderful insects that had produced the wax. Greta had shelves with hundreds of molds. The oldest was from the 16th century, a copper tube with hand-forged details that she'd inherited from her grandmother, Grandmother Johanna, who died in 1927. The grandmother had been a candle maker too, like her mother, like her mother's mother. The craft had been passed down generation to generation, mother to daughter, like a holy relic, like a religion. Greta was the last in that line, unless one of her nieces wanted to continue the tradition. But the nieces lived in the city, and the city had no interest in beeswax candles. That troubled Greta sometimes, when she was alone, when the work was done. In this winter, she had especially many orders. People wanted real beeswax candles, wanted the authenticity, wanted the scent. They came to the workshop and sniffed and bought. Some came from far away, from Munich even, from Nuremberg, from the Rhineland, to acquire real candles. The quantity spoke for itself. Greta took time with each customer. She showed them the old molds, the copper molds, the tin molds, explained where the wax came from the bees, from the wildflowers, and cultivated flowers the bees visited. She showed them how the candles were made, the process, step by step, the patience, the time, the love that went into it. She understood that people nowadays had forgotten how long things took, how much work went into them. Sometimes a customer asked why the candles were so expensive. Greta smiled patiently and explained it all. The wax, the most expensive material, the time, 40 dips or more, the love each candle carried, the story, the tradition 100 years old, the family that 4 generations had guarded this art. Some customers understood right away and bought several candles. Some didn't understand, thought they were too dear, that industry was cheaper. But those who understood that quality is time, that beauty costs time, that tradition demands sacrifice, always came back, bought more candles, told their friends. In the evenings, when she was alone, Greta sat before the stove and ate soup and bread, home-baked sourdough bread she made on weekends. She listened to the wind between the trees outside, the rustle of spruces and firs. She thought about the bees, sleeping now, deep in their hives, warm and safe and cuddled like baby siblings. She thought about the honey and the wax, these gifts of nature that never ended so long as you respected the bees, so long as you protected their home. There was much to learn for anyone wanting to become a candle maker. Much time and patience was necessary. Greta showed young people the art sometimes, taught them patiently. She was generous with her time, though she herself was busy, though days were never long enough. She understood that this old handicraft mustn't die, that if it died, something important died with it. Something about beauty and time. Last year, a young woman had learned with her for a year, had dipped the wicks all that time and cleaned the molds and heard the stories. And now that woman, Sarah was her name, had opened her own small workshop in Grafenau, 2 villages over. Greta was proud of this successor, of passing on the art, of the hope that the tradition wouldn't end with her. The snow fell lightly outside the window of her workshop. The snowflakes landed on the firs and glittered in the light of her work. Greta was content. She wasn't rich, but she needed little. She had her work, she had her art, she had the memory of all those who'd practiced this art before her. That was enough. And now, as the train travels to Zwiesel and the snow-covered forests rush past, the spruces and firs full of white, imagine Greta in her workshop making her candles, hour after hour, with patience. Imagine the golden candles glowing in the darkness, giving warmth and shelter, burning and burning. She's one of the few who still masters this old craft, who hasn't given up, who has stood firm against industry. She's the guardian of old wisdom, of handicraft that endures through time, that doesn't vanish. Sleep now with the scent of beeswax in the air, knowing there are still people who work the old way, who create beauty with their hands, that there's still magic in this world. The train passed through a tunnel, and for a short moment there was only darkness outside. Just the rumble, just the echo of the wheels against the tunnel walls. Ta-dam, ta-dam. And then we were out again, and the night took us back like a mother gathering her child into her arms after a brief adventure. I thought how beautiful that is. Tunnel and night, then tunnel again and night again, on and on and on and on. And after a while, you stop knowing what's outside and what's in, because it all blurs together, becomes one. Because sleep is so close now, you can almost smell it. And the landscape outside grew softer. The outlines of the trees dissolved. The fields became dark surfaces over which the moon sometimes let its pale light slide. I felt my breath grow slower, my heart grow slower, felt my whole body sink downward into the warm embrace of the seat cushion, into the warm embrace of this train, carrying me without me needing to do anything for it. That was a good feeling, a rare feeling, to be carried without effort, simply to trust that the wheels keep rolling, that the tracks keep leading, that morning will come eventually. Sit down, Let me tell you about a man who spent his whole life waiting for an invisible window that opens only once a year. A fisherman named Sandor, and he knows the Tees like almost no other man on this earth, perhaps better than anyone. Sandor is 75 years old and still travels on the Theiss when spring comes and the river awakens again. The Theiss is a river in Hungary, a broad, apparently sluggish river that winds through the flat Hungarian landscape like a green snake, loud and slow at once. Sandor has been here his whole life, in Tokaj and in Szeged, in the mountains and on the flat plains. He knows every centimeter, every bend, every deep hole where the large fish live, every shallow stretch where the trout leap. In April, he waits for something very specific, something most people wouldn't understand, not even other fishermen. He waits for the mayfly swarm, for that mystical event. Not sometime in May, but in that very specific, very particular window of just a few days, when the water temperature is between 12 and 17 degrees, when the nights are still cool, but the days are beginning to grow notably warmer. It's like a secret between him and the river, a pact, a trust. The mayflies aren't large fish, not even really fish, they're insects, but they're king on the Theiss in this 1 month. The most important creatures for all anglers and all predatory fish. They emerge from their larvae, their pupae, in the riverbed, fly up into the warm air, exist briefly as adults, perhaps 12 to 24 hours, dance in the air, mate, and then die. It's an ancient dance of nature, an ancient choreography, and Sandor has learned to read it the way other people read books, the way musicians read notes. He packs his equipment together, old, proven equipment that's been his for 40 years, since he was still young. The bamboo fishing rod, ground and polished by decades. The lures made of delicate feathers and horse and duck hair, which he ties himself. Sandor makes his lures himself. That's not simple. That requires patience and skill and a true understanding of insects and fish. Every lure is different, varies slightly. Each is a little work of art, a miniature painting. He sits in his dark workshop in the evenings and ties the flies, hour after hour, while night falls, and he waits for spring. The route is always the same, always follows the same logic. From Tokaj to Szeged, about 100 kilometers downstream, but not by train or car, by the river itself, in his old boat. In his old boat, which he's called Gertrud, after his first wife, who died 50 years ago. The boat is wooden, old, marked with dents and scratches from decades, but Sandor trusts her completely. They've traveled together through decades, through good years and bad years. The first day of the journey is long and slow. Sandor starts before sunrise in Tokaj. The river is still and smooth as glass. The fruit trees on the banks are just beginning to bloom, their white and pink blossom clouds catching the first light. It smells of damp earth and of spring, of the world coming of age. The first swallows are already there. They dive and glide over the river, catching small insects. Sandor watches them carefully. They're a good sign, a reliable harbinger. When the swallows are here, the mayflies aren't far behind. At midday, He stops at a quiet shore and eats his dark bread and his well-aged salami. He sits in the sun on a stone and watches the river intently. The grasshoppers chirp, although it's not yet properly warm, still a bit cool. The river is alive. It flows with a constant, unshakable force, one Shandor knows like his own blood, like his heartbeat. He drinks his dry wine from an old bottle and closes his eyes, feeling the sun on his face. The next day, the temperature has risen noticeably. Sandor checks the water with great care. He dips his finger in, feels it precisely. The water is still cold, but no longer shockingly cold, no longer that winter shock. Perhaps 11, perhaps 13 degrees. Another week, he thinks calmly. Perhaps 9 days, perhaps 10. The magical window approaches slowly. He doesn't travel fast. He's not in a hurry at all. What would be the point of traveling fast if the swarm hasn't arrived yet? Instead, he observes the river meticulously, watches the banks, and sees how life awakens. Blossoms everywhere, buds everywhere bursting open. In the willows along the shore, the white and green catkins look like little lamps, like signals. The first warmth of the year shows itself in the longer shadows under the trees. On the third day, south of Solnok, where the river grows broader and more sluggish, he finally sees one. A single mayfly flying over the water, silvery and delicate as a breath. His heart makes a genuine, large leap. A single mayfly. That means it will come very soon. The magical window is opening. Shandor quickly ties a new lure. His hands work instinctively, and he casts with a wide arc. But the fly is too fast, too gone, too fleeting. It's a scout, a harbinger, the first glimpse. The rest comes soon after, comes tomorrow, comes the day after. Shandor waits with eager anticipation. Shandor anchors his boat carefully at a sheltered place where he's protected from the wind, and waits patiently like a monk. He eats his bread, he sleeps, he dreams of fish. The next morning, around 10 o'clock, when the river is finally warm enough, when the sun properly shines in the sky, then it really happens. They come in masses, hundreds, perhaps thousands, a transparent cloud of delicate flights, a living snowfall of insects. The Theiss is suddenly full of life, full of delicate white and green, full of mayflies everywhere, in every direction, a profusion of life. Shandor is happy, for the first time in months. He casts again and again with a grace and beauty, and the fish bite. This isn't work for him, it's dance. He and the fish and the mayflies all together in this one moment, in this one magical window that opens only once a year. Night has fallen. The sun has disappeared below the horizon, and only the last light from the west shines. Shandor sits at the water and looks at the surface. The mayflies still fly. Hundreds of them, thousands, in the twilight, dance over the water. The fish still leap, feed, celebrate the feast of insects. Shandor eats his bread and his cheese, drinks his warm wine. He's happy in this moment, happier than perhaps ever. He thinks of all the decades he's known this river, waited for this moment, decades. He thinks of his father, who taught him this art, that you wait for the right moment, that you work with nature, not against it. Old Shandor would be proud, he thinks, if he could see that the son still does this, still understands this magical moment. Late in the evening, it finally grows quieter. The mayflies become fewer. They're tired after their brief life, after their one day of adulthood. The fish grow sluggish. Shandor sets down his rod and simply looks at the river. He thinks of continuity, of all the life in this river, of all the millennia this river has flowed. And in the evening dusk, tired and deeply satisfied, Sandor settles to rest in his boat, while the last mayflies fade around him, and the Tis flows gently as always. The magical window has been open. Everything was right. Everything was as it should be, as it must be. And the landscape outside grew softer. The outlines of the trees dissolved. The fields became dark surfaces over which the moon sometimes let its pale light glide. I felt how my breathing slowed, how my heart slowed, how the whole body let itself sink downward into the warm embrace of the seat cushion, into the warm embrace of this train carrying me without my needing to do anything. That was a good feeling, a rare feeling, to be carried without effort, simply to trust that the wheels would keep turning, that the rails would continue, that morning would eventually come. Listen to me. I'll tell you about a woman who spent 60 years waiting for a bird. Not every day, just once a year, but with absolute dedication and precision. Her name is Marta, and she lives in a small village that lies today in western Ukraine. Back then, it was Galicia, still an Austrian province. Marta is 81 now, and her memory for the cuckoo's call is as precise as a clock. More precise, even. On the wall of her room hangs a thick notebook, bound in dark, worn leather, the book of her life with the cuckoo. Each page documents an April, a May. Each page a carefully made entry, the exact date, the time down to the minute, the temperature, if possible, the character of the day. In 60 years, Marta hasn't missed a single cuckoo call. It's her life's work, her obsession, her sacred task. Spring comes slowly to this valley in Galicia. The fruit trees bloom later here than in the Burgenland. It's cooler. The wind blows from the Carpathians with a damp force that makes the blossoms fade faster. But Marta knows the signs precisely. When the forsythias begin turning yellow, when the frogs in the streams start croaking, when the grasshoppers chirp, then it's time. The cuckoo is never earlier than late April. She knows this from 60 years of experience. Her route leads from Przemysl to Lviv, always in spring, always alone. She walks with a small rucksack containing her thick notebook, a pen, a pencil for notes, a piece of dark bread, and some cheese. It's about 50 kilometers. She needs 3 days, sometimes 4 when she moves more slowly. Some years people have offered her rides, but she prefers to walk. You hear better on foot, thinks Marta. The ear is more focused when the feet are working. Marta has lived through many years, many decades. She was married to Jakub, had children, grandchildren, now watches them grow up. Her husband Jakub died 30 years ago, died quietly in his sleep. But he always understood why she disappeared around this time each year. "The cuckoo is calling," he'd say with a smile, and that was reason enough. That was reason enough for everything. Her children sometimes laughed at their mother waiting for a bird, waiting for the same bird for decades. But Marta didn't listen. She had her task, her sacred task. The first day is always a long walk. She follows the route she's known for decades, the paths that are no longer as young as she once was. Past old farmhouses whose roofs are grey and ancient, through dense forests whose trees might be 100 years old, across meadows that are particularly green this spring after a damp winter. The air smells intensely of damp earth, of grass, of life awakening after a long winter's sleep. Sometimes she sees the first swallows gliding through the air with their long wingtips searching for insects. Marta makes a careful note in her small notebook. Swallows sighted, April 24th, 1430. Direction northeast. Changeable weather. At night, she sleeps in a small inn she's known for 30 years, an old house with thick walls. The innkeeper, now old like Marta, treats her with great respect. You might almost say reverence. The Cuckoo Listener, they call Marta in this area, and she's famous for her task. Some people come especially to her to ask if she's heard the call, because Marta is the living barometer of spring in the town, nature's reliable calendar. On the second day, she walks deliberately slower, more carefully, more present. She has a place, a very specific place she seeks. It's a dense forest, about 10 kilometers before Lviv, of old firs and pines, a place where she heard the call for the first time, 60 years ago, when she herself was still a young girl, only 17 years old. She doesn't really know why she always wanders back to this place, because the cuckoo could be anywhere. Its calls carry far across the landscape. But she does it every year, goes to this specific place, seeks out this specific forest. The grasshoppers chirp loudly in the midday heat, and it's noticeably warmer now, the sun higher in the sky. Marta sits on an old tree stump, grey and moss-covered, and waits. She waits patiently, for she has patience. Her eyes aren't as good as they once were, the colors more faded, but her ears are still sharp, very sharp. She listens intensely. The forest is full of sounds, a concert of birdsong, the wind rustling through leaves, a stream babbling in the distance, insects humming. And then, around 4 in the afternoon, just as it almost always happens, she hears it. Cuckoo. Just that one word, those 2 syllables. Twice, a male marking his territory, saying, "This is my land." Marta's heart leaps, as it does every year, though she's experienced this 60 times. She opens her notebook with trembling hands and writes carefully with her old pencil. 25th of April, 1603. Forest edge south of Sambor. Call distinctly male. Weather overcast but warm. Temperature about 12 degrees. Light southerly wind. She waits longer still, sits quiet on the tree stump. But there are only these 2 calls that day, That's normal. The cuckoo will call much more in the coming weeks, perhaps hundreds of times. But the first call, this very first call, that's always this one magical moment. She sits on the tree stump and weeps a bit, as she does every year. It's not sorrow, it's relief, almost bliss. The cuckoo is here. The year has truly begun. The seasons are still in order. Nature is still whole. On the third day, she walks slowly, almost dreamily, toward Lviv. She buys herself a black coffee at a small cafe in the center, and the innkeeper there has also known her for a long time. "Heard the cuckoo again?" asks the innkeeper with a smile. Marta nods slowly. "Certainly." "Yes, yesterday. He's early this year. That means a good summer, good harvest, much warmth." She doesn't really know if that's true, but Marta has made this statement every year about every season, and no one contradicts her. She's the undisputed expert on the cuckoo, the woman who's waited 60 years, and who would dare contradict her wisdom, tell her she's wrong? Late in the evening, Marta sits in a simple cafe and drinks warm tea. The city of Lviv is old, full of history, full of memories. Marta thinks of all the years she's spent here, in this cafe, after the cuckoo's call, celebrating that the year begins. The innkeeper here has known her for 40 years, and the woman automatically brings her tea, warm honey, a piece of bread. No words needed. That's understanding between two old women. The cuckoo's call still echoes in Marta's ears. She can still hear it, can still feel the exact pitch. It was a strong call, a male call, rich and full. That's a good sign for the year, she thinks. A strong cuckoo means abundance, means luck, means continuity. She's never really proven this scientifically, but after 60 years of observation, she believes in it. She carries her diary with her, and before she goes to bed, she opens it and writes with great care a final entry. 25th of April, 2026. Forest Edge, south of Sambor. 1603. Call, distinctly male, strong and clear. Weather overcast. Temperature about 12 degrees. Means a good year. All signs are right. She signs with her old hand and closes the book. Tomorrow she'll make her way home on the long journey back. But for today, she's fulfilled her task. She's listened. She's documented. She's preserved the continuity. And that night, in her small, simple room in Lviv, Marta enters her careful notes in the notebook, falls asleep peacefully, like a woman who's fulfilled her sacred task. The cuckoo has called. His call has confirmed that the world still exists. The year can truly begin. And the landscape outside grew softer. The outlines of the trees dissolved. The fields became dark surfaces over which the moon sometimes let its pale light glide. I felt how my breathing slowed, how my heart slowed, how the whole body let itself sink downward into the warm embrace of the seat cushion, into the warm embrace of this train carrying me without my needing to do anything. That was a good feeling, a rare feeling, to be carried without effort, simply to trust that the wheels would keep turning, that the rails would continue, that morning would eventually come. Come, sit down. Let me tell you about a man who spent his life waiting for storks. It's spring in the Burgenland. The air smells of freshly plowed earth, and Josef sits on his veranda as he does every year at this time. Josef is 78 now, and his eyes are still sharp as an eagle when it comes to watching. For 50 years, he's kept a notebook documenting when the white storks return, where they build their nests, how many young birds they raise. The notebooks stand in rows on a shelf in his living room, one for each year, each filled with his meticulous entries. The oldest volumes are faded, the ink bleached to a delicate brown, but the words are still legible, still precise as the day they were written. The day he waits for approaches. It's April, and the first warm days after winter lure the birds out of their African wintering grounds and back home. Josef sips his morning coffee slowly, savoring the quiet of the still sleeping village. Far out across the flat landscape of the Burgenland, across the plains that stretch to the horizon, he hears the church bells from the village. They ring melodiously and soothingly, like a welcome greeting for those returning. At 8 in the morning he sets out. He knows his route by heart, from Vienna to Eisenstadt, but not on the main road. He takes the small lanes, past the farmhouses where the fruit trees are in full bloom. Apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees. Their white and pink blossoms gleam in the morning sun like little lanterns. The air is filled with their sweet scent. Everywhere in the gardens, life sprouts again. Birds sing, not yet many, but enough to give the morning a vitality winter couldn't provide. His first nest that day is on the roof of an old barn near Volker-Prodersdorf. With his little binoculars and his notebook, he waits on the field path. Grasshoppers chirp already, though the morning is still cool, and a fresh wind sweeps across the fields. Josef sits on a stone and watches long and patiently. Nothing. The barn is still empty, but that's normal. Some storks need another 2 or 3 weeks. Others arrive faster. He makes a careful note. Nest 1, empty. April 7th, 8:15. Weather overcast. Temperature about 8 degrees. On he goes. At the next station, on a church spire near Schützen am Gebirge, he finds his first stork pair of the year. His heart leaps, as it does every year, though he's witnessed this 100 times. There they are, finally. The male and female, they clatter their beaks, a kind of greeting ritual, a mutual welcome home that Josef never tires of seeing in all his years. It's like a dance, like a promise renewed, like the universe proving its order. He notes carefully, his hands almost trembling in his book. Church spire Schützen, pair arrived, approximately 8:50. Nest being built. Both birds in good condition. That's the most important entry of the whole year, thinks Josef. The binoculars have grown warm in his hands, and Josef feels clearly how his tension dissolves, like ice in spring. The first pair is here. The season has officially begun. The long wait has paid off. He sits on a bench beside the church and watches the 2 birds at their intense work. They fly back and forth, again and again, in a rhythmic pattern, bringing small branches, dry grass, small plant parts, everything they need for nest building. The movements are precise, practiced, like an ancient choreography perfected over 1,000 years since humans first saw storks. Joseph knows exactly that this moment is happening all over the Burgenland simultaneously. Hundreds of times. Thousands of times. Storks everywhere coming home from Africa, returning home, knowing where home is. This moment is the heart of the whole year for Joseph. At midday, Joseph stops at a small inn, where the innkeeper already greets him with a smile. Goulash and bread, as every year at this time. The plate is warm, the wine is cold, the atmosphere hospitable. The other guests know who this old man is, the one who counts the storks. They greet him with respect, yes, even with reverence. Joseph has become a piece of local history, a living calendar that knows when nature begins, when the season truly starts. In the afternoon, the wind rises, a cool wind coming from the west, but not unpleasant. The first swallows glide through the air, agile and swift. They too are ready for observation. Their arrival shows that the insects are returning, that the food chain is in motion again. Joseph finds himself now near Eisenstadt, and his notebook is already filled with 10 entries. 3 more nests with storks occupied, 7 still empty, but they'll follow, he's absolutely certain. On the roof of an old weathered factory, he finds a nest he already documented last year, nest number 37 on his route. The pair from back then is back. He recognizes them clearly by a slight deformity on the female's right wing. These storks are faithful. They always return to the same place, the same nest. She recognizes him too, thinks Joseph. Perhaps not really, but there's a moment of stillness when the bird sees him, as though she were nodding, as though she remembered the old man who comes every year. Joseph feels connected to this bird, as though they share a secret. He notes carefully, with great attention. Factory Eisenstadt, same pair as last year and the year before. Female identifiable by small deformity on right wing. Arrival 1420. Nest still intact from last year. Repairs being made. This continuity pleases him. The sun sinks slowly, unstoppably, over the flat plains of the Burgenland. The shadows grow markedly longer, the air noticeably cooler, and takes on again that marvelous scent of damp earth that Joseph has loved all his life. He sits on a small hill and gazes long and pensively at his notebook, studies his entries. 17 entries in total. A very, very good day. A day that says the year is beginning rightly, that the world is still in order. It's now late afternoon, and Joseph makes his way toward Eisenstadt, but slowly, very slowly. He doesn't drive on the motorway. He hasn't done that in a long time. He follows small country roads where nature unfolds, where he can see even more nests. Perhaps 1 or 2 more before sunset. An old man like Joseph doesn't hurry. As the sun hangs low, golden and large as a giant eye on the horizon, he finds 2 more nests, both still empty. But the way is prepared. The return is coming. These nests will be populated in the next few days, perhaps in the next week. Joseph notes everything thoroughly. His hand trembles a bit with fatigue, but the notes are still precise, still clear. That's what matters. The data must be correct. A little way from Eisenstadt, at an old tree, Joseph stops and drinks water from a bottle. He sits on a fieldstone and gazes north. The plains are endless, or so it seems. The light grows ever more orange, ever warmer. The church bells, which he's heard on and off for hours, sound different now. Softer, as though singing a farewell song. The first night of stork season has arrived. On the drive home, he really goes slowly now, tired, but filled with a deep peace. He watches the last rays of sun falling through the white and pink fruit blossoms, still gleaming like little lamps. It's magical, he thinks, how the light and blossoms work together, how nature understands beauty. Nature is stirring to life. Everything becomes new. Everything returns as it should. Joseph thinks of all the years, of all the notebooks, of the thousands of entries, of the tens of thousands of hours he's spent in fields and at church spires. He's not just an observer, he's a chronicler of an ancient migration, a living witness to the return, a keeper of history. And in the dusk, Joseph finally drives home, tired and deeply satisfied as rarely before. His soft bed waits. Tomorrow the work continues. The long season has truly begun. The storks are here, at least the first ones. The season has begun, and Joseph falls asleep like a man who knows that all is right in the world, that history repeats itself as it should. It was October, the time of Edelbrand distillation, when I met her. The journey from Bolzano to Brixen is short, only half an hour. But in that half hour, I sat beside a woman who carried the scent of the whole South Tyrolean harvest in her rucksack. Her name was Katharina, and she didn't simply distill schnapps. She bottled entire seasons. She was small and delicate, perhaps 69 or 70, with curly dark brown hair that had greyed, and eyes that shone like two black berries. She carried a basket, not a modern shopping basket, but an old, traditional woven one, absolutely full of stone pine cones, large, brown, oil-glossy cones, and Williams pears, golden yellow, ripe, sweet-smelling. The scent radiating from her was overwhelming. Not just fruit, but future, flavor, alchemy. I couldn't resist asking her who she was and what she did. Katharina laughed, not mockingly, but warmly, as though pleased someone had asked. I distill Edelbrand, she said. It's not like ordinary schnapps. It's craftsmanship, it's chemistry, it's love. Here in South Tyrol, we have a tradition of distillation older than the land itself. My family has made Edelbrand for 3 generations. My grandfather, a famous distiller, lived to nearly 100, and he worked until the day he died. This isn't a job, it's a life. She showed me the stone pine cones, and with each one she showed, she told a little story. This cone here, she said, comes from the north side of the Geisler, at 3,000 meters elevation. Only the finest stone pine grows up there, where the air is thin and the sun is sharp. The cones develop more oils when they ripen at that height. And these pears, she said, lifting one, these Williams pears come from a tree that's 100 years old, in a garden in Kaltern. I know the gardener, we're friends, and he keeps the best pears for me. The process she described was poetic. You peel the pear, and that's already an art because you must keep the skin, the aroma lives in the skin. And you place it in a glass vessel with high-proof alcohol, grape schnapps, very clear, very pure. The vessel sits in a dark cellar at a precise temperature, and the pear gives its aroma to the alcohol. That takes weeks, sometimes months. Then you do the distillation process. That's traditionally done in a large copper pot over an open fire, using the water bath method. The vapors rise and are cooled, and then the essence comes out. She smelled of pears, and something even older, of wood, of time, of the past, of decades in a dark cellar. Her hands, as she showed me the fruit, were gentle but also strong, perhaps trembling slightly with age. The hands of someone who'd worked physically her whole life, for the craft, for tradition. It's not just the distilling, she said. It's also intuition. You must know, not with your head, but here, she said, pointing to her heart, when the distillation is right. You don't simply distill to the end like dumb machines. You make fractions. The first fraction, it's too strong, too aggressive, too much alcohol, too sharp. The last fraction, it's too weak, too thin, too watered down. You collect only the middle. Only the middle. That's the golden fraction, the heart of the distillate, the true gift of the fruit. The train route from Bolzano to Brixen is magnificent. We traveled through the Isaac Valley, and the mountains were spectacular. The Geisler Group on one side, the Dolomites on the other, all in autumn colors, all in gold and red and orange, and already white on the higher peaks. The larch trees, larches everywhere, these delicate, beautiful trees dropping their needles like a ceremony, like a farewell to the year. And Katerina pointed out the window to me. There, she said, that's the mountain where the best stone pine grows. And there, in that valley, that's where the oldest distilleries of South Tyrol are. She told me about a special Edelbrand she'd make this year. A blend of Williams pear and stone pine, something her grandmother made 60 years ago. But then the family had switched to modern production. My father, she said, he was an entrepreneur. He wanted to produce faster, bigger quantities. But you can't do that. Not with true Edelbrand. You need time. You need patience. You need hands that know. And these hands, she said, showing me hers, soon won't be able to work anymore. I'm old. I'm tired. But I want to make this one last Edelbrand before I stop. The thought that this tradition might end with her hurt. Here in South Tyrol, where distillation is everywhere, where it seems every family has a distiller, the same was true. The young people don't want to learn the craft. They want modern jobs, security, predictable incomes. Distillation is work without guarantee. It's work that costs your whole life. But it's also creation. It's art. It's the essence of life, locked in bottles. She gave me a small bottle, not to drink, but to smell. It was Edelbrand from last year, Williams pear, golden amber-colored. The light shining through the bottle was like liquid sun. I smelled it, and my whole world changed. It wasn't simply a scent. It was a memory, a story, an account of the pear harvest, of autumn, of the South Tyrolean sun, a fragrance that carried decades within it, that told of history, of love, of work. Before we arrived in Brixen, I asked her quietly, as though the question itself were sacred. What will happen to your craft? Who will carry it on? She looked out the window for a long time, a very long time, without speaking, as the mountains glided past. I saw her eyes shine with tears, not sorrow, more depth. Then she spoke quietly, in a voice that was old and young at once. I don't know. Perhaps no one. Perhaps the tradition will die with me when I close the distillery. That hurts. Here. She pointed to her heart. But I'm not sad about it, understand me. I've spent my whole life doing what I love. Not everyone can say that. I've received letters from people who drink my Edelbrand, and they tell me they feel at home when they smell it, when they drink it. That's enough. The world will change, will become modern, but there will always be people who appreciate good Edelbrand, who understand that it requires craftsmanship, time, patience. And perhaps my work will survive in memories, in books, in the stories people tell. She got out in Brixton, with her basket full of stone pine cones and Williams pears, heading back to her distillery to work. The last thing I saw of her was the bottle I still held in my hand, golden amber, shining like hope. Katarina's Edelbrand, from a time almost gone, from hands about to stop working, from a heart still burning like the fire beneath the copper pot. Imagine yourself sitting here with me, between Bolzano and Brixen, and outside the South Tyrolean mountains look like home itself, golden and wise. The scent of Williams pear and stone pine fills the air, not overwhelming, but gentle, sweet, intoxicating. You hold the small bottle in your hand, the bottle with the golden Edelbrand, and you know that within it lies the life of a woman, her work, her passion, her hope. The train's wheels carry you through the valleys, and the larches drop their needles, and the world grows quieter, older, wiser. And now, close your eyes. Forget the rush. Forget the world out there. Imagine opening the small bottle, not to drink, but to breathe. And in that scent, in that sweet, golden scent, you find all the stories. The harvest in autumn, the nights in the cellar, Katarina's hands working, the patience, the years, the love. Sleep comes slowly, like the golden distillate, like the essence itself, cooling gradually as the day ends. You fall asleep to the sound of the rails, to the scent of the mountains, to the feeling that some things are eternal, and some things remain precious, even when the world forgets them. The journey from Visp to Brig isn't long, perhaps 20-30 kilometers. But in those few minutes, I met a woman who completely changed my understanding of what craft means. Her name was Ursula, and she was a walker. Not in the modern sense, where people walk for fitness, but in the old, true sense of the word. She walked wool. In a fulling mill that barely exists anymore. I saw her on the platform in Visp, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. A smell of damp wool, of alkalis, of something earthy I couldn't immediately identify. She was a small woman, perhaps over 70, with silver hair plaited in 2 thick braids. And her hands, God, her hands, were red-stained from the work, from generations of lye and water. She wore a linen dress that seemed itself to be made of hand-woven wool, and when I spoke to her, she smiled as if she'd been expecting me. Ursula wasn't just a walker, but she was the walker of the region. There was, in a side valley of Wallace, an old fulling mill that had belonged to the Waller family for 150 years. Her grandfather had built it, her father ran it, and now, she said with a mixture of pride and sadness, I run it alone. That is craft, that is tradition, but it's also loneliness. Because nobody wants this work anymore, this old work. The young, they leave. She showed me her hands while the train was moving, and she told of the work her hands began fresh every year. The process was complex, more beautiful and brutal than I'd ever imagined. You start with raw wool, she said. Raw wool, as it comes from the sheep. It's dirty, full of oil, full of things that shouldn't be there. But in that dirt there is strength. There are the fibers, the life of the wool. You have to respect it. The fulling mill works with water, she said, with water power, a force older than electricity. Falling water from the mountains, clear water, cold as ice, full of minerals. The water drives huge wooden rollers, massive rollers with a special shape, rounded on top, flat on bottom. The wool is placed in a basin that holds hot lye, soap, ash, natural materials, nothing chemical. Then the wool is placed under those rollers, and the rollers lift and fall, beating the wool, day after day, sometimes for several days. The rhythm is hypnotic, constant, like a heartbeat. Each blow compacts the fibers, felts them, transforms them into a new cloth, denser, warmer, more durable. What was interesting, what was almost poetic, was that Ursula didn't just describe this process technically, but as a kind of dialogue with a living material. The wool speaks to you, she said. Not in words, understand me, not like people talk, but through its reaction to the water, to the rollers, to time. It changes, and if you're awake, if you're watching, you understand that change. You learn how fast the rollers should go, how long the wool should stay in the lye, when the temperature is right, when it starts transforming from raw fiber to fine cloth. And if you have experience, decades of experience, 50 years perhaps, then you know without measuring, without thermometers, without clocks, you become part of the process. The mill and you, the wool and you work together like dancers who know the same rhythm. The landscape gliding past while she spoke was the Wallace in autumn, spectacular and wild and unforgettable. The mountainsides were steep, almost vertical, with larches beginning to lose their golden colors, shedding needles like golden rain. On the highest peaks, snow already lay white and unwelcoming, a warning to all who lived down here that winter was coming. And everywhere you saw small villages, houses with smoking chimneys, small people working, small cultures clinging to their traditional arts like to life rafts. These villages, said Ursula, these are the hearts. The cities, they're the brains. But without a heart, the brain dies. The soul dies. The wool I wash comes from sheep in these mountains. The shepherds, they're my family. She told me of a particular piece of wool she'd just finished, a large order from a famous hotel in Zermatt that wanted traditional Wallace wool for their beds, real wool for modern guests who'd almost forgotten what real feels like. 2 years, she said, it took to put that together. 2 years. That's not exaggeration. That's reality when you work the old way, the right way. 2 years to find the right shepherds, to speak with them, to identify the right sheep. Not all sheep give the same quality of wool, you know. To collect the wool at the right time, at the right moment in the year. To wash it, to dry it, to treat it in the mill, with the rollers, with water from the mountains, until the wool was perfect. Not too hard, not too soft, but exactly right. 2 years. And for those 2 years, for this crafted work, for this quality, for this love, they'll pay, well, not very much. Just enough to keep the mill running, to pay for water, to repair the wooden rollers if needed, to survive the next year. There was no bitterness in her voice, but a kind of wise acceptance, a resignation that was also joy. That's life when you love a craft the world has forgotten. You know you won't get rich. You know the young will leave. You know the tradition will probably die with you. But there's a deep peace in that, she said. A deep contentment that you can't buy with money. That comes from knowing you make something real. Something that's substantial, that endures. Something people need, even if they don't know it. We were almost in Brig. The mountains turned grayer, harsher. The air grew colder. The train slowed, and Ursula gathered her things with slow, deliberate movements. But before she stepped out, she gave me something. A piece of wool. A square from the wool she'd just finished. A sample for the hotel. It was so dense, so compact, that you could barely tear it. So warm that it radiated heat like a living stone. I understood immediately why people used to live on this quality, why they loved it. You can't fake that with machines, she said, her voice growing quieter, wiser. That comes from patience. That comes from love. That comes from the mountains, from water that needs no chemistry, from the life of the sheep I know, and from my hands, red hands, in this old mill, where my grandfather stood, and his grandfather, and perhaps only me. She stepped out, and I watched her for another moment on the platform in Brig, with her bag full of wool, heading back to the mill, to her work, to her calling. The last thing I saw of her was her silver hair glowing in the light of the setting sun like a crown, and the gesture of her hand waving, a slow, wise gesture, as if she'd already said goodbye to this modern world, to this fast time that she didn't understand and didn't want to understand. But she was content. I saw that. Close your eyes now. Imagine you're sitting with me on this train between Visp and Brig, and outside the last leaves of the larches fall like rain of gold. The smell of wool and water is everywhere, not unpleasant, but loving, the essence of craft. You hold the square of wool in your hands, and it's so warm it's almost like a living being. You know that generations of people have placed their hands in this cloth. You know that old things are still valuable. And as the train's wheels rock you, as the mountains grow darker and the stars begin to shine, you fall asleep, completely secure in the feeling that some things remain. Some things that really count. My eyes grew heavy, so heavy, as if someone had gently laid a warm hand on my eyelids and said, "Now it's good. Now it's enough for today." And I heard the train, ta-dum, ta-dum, and I heard the quiet breathing of another passenger who'd already fallen asleep. And I heard the distant rushing of wind at the window panes, and all these sounds were like a gentle blanket laid over me, layer after layer, warmth after warmth, until I felt nothing except the quiet gliding of the train through the night. I've never told you about Ingrid, have I? A woman I met on the line from Innsbruck to Kitzbühel sometime in the 70s, when autumn was just beginning and the mountain air still carried warmth, but was already hinting at the cold, the promise of winter. She smelled of essential oils, of herbs, of something I couldn't name, but which immediately drew me into another world, a world where old things were still real, where craftsmanship still meant something. Let me tell you about this woman and her craft, about the mountains she loved, and about the oil that was like liquid light. The dwarf pine, you see, isn't an ordinary tree. It's a miniature species, small and resilient, growing in the alpine heights where hardly anything else thrives. In Tyrol, especially in the higher elevations, everywhere the air is thin and the ground is hard, these trees grow in dense thickets together, as if they'd huddled against each other for warmth. And Ingrid, this woman with sandy hair and brown, weathered eyes, she collected the cones of these trees. In autumn, she said, when the cones turn dark, the oil in them has the right strength. This isn't simply collecting, it's science, tradition, and craftsmanship all in one. I first saw her on the platform in Innsbruck, with baskets, large woven baskets of pale straw, full of dark brown cones. She wore a simple linen dress, green, with an apron over it, and her arms were red, from the sun or from the sharp needles of the pine, I didn't know. She was helping a man load the baskets into the luggage rack, and when I spoke to her, quite impolitely I know, she smiled and said, "You're from the trains, yes? I have an eye for such things. Come, sit down. I'll tell you something." The train pulled away, and Ingrid set to work. She opened her bag, also linen, worn and lovingly mended, and showed me a small bottle. Inside was an oil, as clear as water, but with a scent that opened my nostrils, and at the same time quickened my heart. "This is dwarf pine distillate from this summer," she said. "Not the kind I sell. That's for pharmacies and hotels. That's more commercial. But this is for the exhibition in Kitzbühel. This is craftsmanship. This is 50-year-old tradition." Ingrid told me about her mother, who was also a distiller, and her mother's mother, and so on, perhaps 6 generations back. The family had been in Tyrol, on the side of the Ötztal Mountains, and there they operated a small distillery. Not large, not mechanized. It's still handmade today. You can't just take a motor and put the cones in and get oil out, she said. It doesn't work that way. It needs heat, the right heat, steam, time, patience. It also needs love. She described the process with a devotion that showed me this wasn't merely work. This was a calling. You gather the cones at the right time, she said. You can't take them too early, not too late. There's a window, perhaps 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when the ripeness is exactly right. Then you carry them home. You spread them on cloths. You let them dry, but not in the sun. No, that's wrong. But in a dark, cool place where air circulates. It's like raising a child. You have to be careful. The landscape outside the train was spectacular. We were traveling down through the Zillertal, and everywhere you saw the larches, these fine, beautiful larches, changing their colors, from green to gold to brown, in a symphony of autumn. And everywhere, on the higher slopes, you saw the dark thickets of dwarf pine. Ingrid pointed outside. There, she said. There, up there. I was there last week. I spent 3 days up there, with my basket, with my knife, with my hands. I collected 18 kilos of cones. For that, I'll get maybe 2 liters of oil. 2 liters? I asked her in disbelief, and she laughed, but not mockingly, more resignedly, lovingly, as if she'd had to explain this 1,000 times. Yes, she said, 2 liters from 18 kilos. That's the ratio. That's why you don't get rich with this craft, why the young people leave for the cities, why these arts die. But haven't you become richer in another sense? I asked, and I was curious, truly curious. And she looked at me, and her eyes grew soft, and she said, "Oh God, that's the best question anyone's ever asked me." She then told me of the years in the mountains, of the freshness of the air like knives through the lungs, of the wildflowers growing everywhere in the colors of the sun itself, of the chamois that sometimes looked down on her from the highest rock faces as if checking whether she could be trusted. She also told of the other collectors who went up, but with quite different intentions. Chemicals, she said, chemicals everywhere. Insecticides on the fields below, plastic nets to protect the plants. But from what? From nature? I don't understand it. Nature doesn't need nets. It needs time, patience, respect, the human hand that knows how to take without destroying. But people, they want faster, stronger, bigger. And in doing so, they lose something important. The connection. The love. The distillation itself, she then told me, is almost medical, almost religious. You put the cones in a large pot. She used a copper pot, hand-hammered, 100 years old, dark brown from centuries of use. And you add water. But this is no ordinary water. This is spring water, from a place high in the mountain that only she knew, that her grandmother had shown her. The water must cover the cones, but not too much, otherwise the oil is too diluted. Then you light a fire. Not too hot, no, that would be catastrophic. And you wait while the copper pot slowly warms, while steam rises, while the essential oils mix with the water vapor, while the whole air smells like the mountain itself, like home. You wait. It takes hours, perhaps 6, 7 hours. You can't leave. You must stay with the pot, must watch, must be part of the process. "What do you do all that time?" I asked. And Ingrid smiled, as if I'd asked what she did while breathing. "I sing," she said. "I sing alpine songs, songs my mother taught me, songs that are older than this distillery. I sing, and I hear the steam, and I smell the oils, And I'm not alone. The mountain is with me. The tradition is with me. The generations before me, they're all in the room, in the steam. Towards the end of the journey, we were already near Kitzbühel, the mountains becoming steeper, wilder. I asked her if she still does the exhibition, the craftsmanship exhibition. Yes, she said, every year. I exhibit not primarily to sell, though I do that too, but to show that there are still people who haven't forgotten, people who respect the mountains, people who don't give up the right things, the important things. She gave me a small bottle before she stepped out. I still try to smell it sometimes, after all these years. The scent was so intense, so pure that it almost hurt. This is a gift, she said. This is from 1973. It was distilled 3 years ago. It only gets better with time. Like people, she hopes. Like people, if they're lucky, if they don't give up too soon. Close your eyes now and forget time, burden, haste. Imagine you're sitting with me on the train, and outside, the mountains look like old friends, golden and wise, full of mystery. The scent of dwarf pine is everywhere, in the air, in your lungs, in your dreams. This sharp, pure smell that cleanses you. And you hear the singing, not your voice, but Ingrid's voice. Ancient music rising through the steam. Music that 100 generations have heard. The train's wheels are rhythm, a gentle rhythm rocking you. The landscape is color, each color a word in a poem. And sleep comes slowly, like the finished oil from the distillery. Clear, pure, precious, essence, arriving exactly when you're ready to rest. And somewhere in this dark landscape, I thought still, other people are sleeping now in their beds, in their houses, and the moon looks down on them, and the moon looks down on us, and everything is in its place. The fields are in their place, the forests are in their place, the rivers are in their place, and I am in my place, here in this carriage, here in this warm cradle of wood and cloth and metal that carries me where I must go, without my needing to wake, without my needing to do anything except trust and rest. The route from Jenbach to Meyerhofen is one I've somehow never told you about before, though you'd like it. You always ask me why the most beautiful journeys are the ones you forget to tell, and I'll tell you today. Because some moments are so personal that they only work if you carry them secretly, like treasure in your pocket. But now, in autumn, when the leaves turn yellow and the mountains begin to freeze, I think again of the stone collector I met there, and I simply must tell you. Because she taught me something about time, about love, about the earth itself. Jenbach is a station most people overlook. There's a cog railway up to the Aachensee, and if you have the time and strength in your legs, you take it. But I saw her on the platform before the train had even arrived in Meyerhofen. A woman, perhaps in her early 70s, with a rucksack so full it hung over her whole shoulder. And in her hands, imagine this. In her hands she held stones. Not simple stones, but stones that glittered. Quartz, feldspar, tourmaline. The whole spectrum of minerals found in the Zillertal Mountains. She laid the stones very carefully on a newspaper stand on the platform, as if she had all the time in the world. Her name was Rosa, and she'd been collecting minerals for 50 years. In autumn, she told me later, I get on all the trains and collect stones for the big Minerals and Crystals exhibition in Meerhofen that happens in November. That was her life. Not professionally, understand me, she was retired. But it was her passion, her way of communicating with the world. She'd observed and tended every formation, every layer, every deposit in the mountains for decades. She knew where the dolomite was particularly beautiful, where the quartz veins glimmered between the slate, where the warm granite outcrops gleamed in the sun. The train started. I was back in the compartment, and Rosa with me. She unpacked the stones very carefully from her rucksack and arranged them on the windowsill, as if she were setting up an entire museum installation. Each stone was sorted by size, by color, by light. She told me the origin of each one. "This one here," she said, and pointed to a pink translucent stone. "This is a tourmaline from the Zillergrund. I found it 3 years ago. It lay in my basement on a cloth for 3 years so the mud could dry off. This black one, this is magnetite, from a deposit that now exists on only one side of the mountain. In 1 generation, it'll probably be covered over." Rosa was like a book once opened that you can't close again. She told me about her collections, about the minerals that had disappeared because the world changed, because people mined, because roads were built over old collecting sites. She told me about the Zillertal, which she'd known her whole life. She was born there, in a small house next to an alm, and she never really left. Only on the train, 3 or 4 times a year, to search for new stones, to attend collectors' meetings, to prepare her exhibition. The landscape passing by while she told me of these stones was autumnal, like out of a picture book. The Zillertal Alps had turned white early, snow at the top, forest in orange and brown below. The larches were shedding their needles, those delicate yellow needles falling like rain from above. And Rosa kept pointing out the window. "There," she said, "there my father found quartz crystals 60 years ago. Now there's only forest and meadow. We lose our own treasures." But it wasn't sad telling. It was more like a loving farewell, an acceptance that everything changes, that stones too have a history, like any other life. Rosa didn't have the attitude of someone who'd lost, but rather someone who'd been witness to something great. "The earth," she said, "the earth has memory in its stones. And if you read the stones, you read the history. The world speaks to us, but only through patience. I don't collect to possess. I collect to understand. Each stone is a sentence. Together, they make a book. And that book gets thinner every year because the pages are being built away." On the train, it was perhaps 5 or 6 kilometers to Meerhofen, she told me about a particular exhibition she's been building for 30 years. "Yes," she said, "I'm the one who's been making the big November exhibition all these years. Most people don't know there's an entire human life behind this exhibition. No big museum, no sponsor. Just me, my collection, and many helpers who understand my madness. We arrange the stones, write little labels showing where they come from. Some have GPS coordinates. Some are photos of collecting sites that no longer exist." Rosa reached into her rucksack, a shabby green rucksack, perhaps 40 years old, with stains and patches, the fabric worn at the edges. and showed me photographs. Black and white images of mountainsides with arrows in ink showing where the stones came from, and color photos, more recent, of the same mountainsides, all changed, all modernized. She almost smelled those photos, as if she'd touched them 1,000,000 times. "This forest path," she said, pointing to an old image, "doesn't exist anymore. There's a road now. Cars drive over places I know. And this one here, this was a small cave where I searched for crystals with my husband by moonlight with battery lamps. It was blasted away for a building project, a ski slope or something. I don't even know exactly." The train slowed. We were approaching Meerhofen, and Rosa packed her stones away again. But she didn't do this carelessly. She wrapped each stone in soft cloth. She counted them off. She checked her rucksack pockets. These were her treasures, not in the sense of money. Mineral collectors don't make money from it. But treasures in another sense. Treasures as proof it existed. Treasures as memory. Before she stepped out, and that was the most beautiful moment of that whole journey, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for listening to me. Really. Most people on the train, they think about something else. Their work, their home, their problems, their phones. I understand that. I'm not blind to modernity. But I've had the enormous good fortune that my whole life became an art form. My exhibition, my stones, that's my way of telling the world, I was here. I saw, I observed, I loved. And I want others to see it too, and to understand what's being lost." She stepped out in Meerhofen, and I watched her go down from the station, the rucksack on her back, the stones in her pockets, on her way to the exhibition, where hundreds of people would come to see the minerals, not knowing that behind it stood a life full of walks, full of observation, full of love for the earth. Rosa was old, but she wasn't tired. She was an artist without brushes, an archivist of the mountains. You, sitting here in your compartment now, on the journey from Jenbach to Meerhofen, or somewhere else, I don't know where you are, don't forget that such people exist. People who see small things and understand great ones, who find an entire world in a single stone. If you feel tired, if the world is too fast, imagine you have time. Time to observe, time to collect, time to understand that every small substance beneath your feet has a story. Close your eyes. Imagine you're with me on the train, and outside the Zillertal Mountains pass, golden and white, autumnal and wild. You smell the forest, you feel the freshness of the air, and in your hands you hold a stone. Not a real one, but one from a dream, one from 1,000 years of memory. The train's wheels rock you back and forth like a cradle, and you fall asleep while Rosa builds her exhibition, stone by stone, memory by memory. And so we traveled on, the train and I and the few other passengers sitting with me in the compartment, or in the compartments nearby, each in our own small corner of the world, each on our own way into sleep. The warmth of the carriage, the soft ticking of the heating, the clacking of wheels on the rails, all of it became a single song, a song without words, a song that carries you along and soothes you and says, "You can let go now. You can rest now." The train travels on for you. Time travels on for you. The world takes care of itself while you sleep. I've told you before that I've always had an eye for the women of the Berchtesgaden area who drive the cattle down from the high pastures in autumn. You're sitting in your compartment today, the route from Berchtesgaden to Freilassing gliding past like a lazy dream. And I want to tell you about one I met many years ago, a dairymaid with a sun-weathered face and a voice like alpine wind. It was mid-September when I first saw her. The train left Berchtesgaden at 6 in the morning. The sun had just climbed over the Watzmann, painting the steep forests orange and red. I was sitting in my carriage with a coffee in hand, not particularly warm anymore, but still drinkable, and gazing out at the alpine meadows that lay like green islands between rock faces and pine forests. And there she was, on horseback, in a traditional dress and leather jacket, a riding crop in her hand, and ahead of her at least 80 cattle, horned and magnificent, festooned with bells that rang like a carillon in the early morning. Her name was Margareta, as I learned later, and she'd been driving the herd down into the valley for 30 years, every single year, when the first frost touched the high pastures. You have to imagine how it looks from a train window. The cattle didn't move in a line, but rather in a cloud-like formation, a brown and white mass winding through narrow paths. Some of the younger animals were restless, jumping aside when they heard the railway, but the older, the wiser ones, proceeded methodically, as if they'd walked this path 100 times. Margareta rode above them on her grey mare, a Tyrolean horse that clearly knew every sound and every movement. She wore a red ribbon in her hair, and when the wind blew the right way, I saw that she was singing, not loudly, but intently, as if it were part of the work itself. And the cattle, you see, that was the remarkable thing. Each one wore flowers around its horns and around its neck. Carnations, asters, chrysanthemums in red and yellow, also withered maple leaves that were already beginning to turn in that September. The bells around their necks weren't all the same. Some were large as melons, others tiny as little handbells, and together they made a symphony when the herd moved. Margareta had fastened all those flowers herself, as I learned later. She'd taken time to stay with each animal, to arrange the flower carefully, to stroke each one, to calm it. These weren't simply cattle destined for the valley. They were her animals, ones she'd tended on the Alp all summer long. The alpine descent is something like a sacred act for these people. Not like us, where we simply travel from A to B and the train runs on schedule. No, each cow has a name, a personality, a story. Margareta knew every animal, knew which ones were temperamental, which were shy, which walked with a limp and therefore had to go near the front so they wouldn't fall behind. While I watched from my window, I saw her take one of the cattle, a dappled, larger cow, to the side when the herd had to descend a steep slope. She stroked the animal, spoke soothingly to it, and the cow then followed the others, calmly. The landscape we were passing through was so autumnal that it almost hurt. The larches had already turned golden, those delicate, pale green larches that in autumn shed their needles like no other tree. On the slopes where the sun couldn't reach, the first snow already lay, thin and fragile, like powdered sugar on a cake. And everywhere in the villages we passed, Stangas, Bad Reichenhall, all those small places, everywhere you could see the wood fires in the chimneys, white columns of smoke rising vertically into the clear, cold air. It smells like autumn, like the end of the alpine season, like the return to houses, to warm rooms. Margarita was certainly 60, perhaps already in her 70s, but she sat on her horse as if she had roots there. Her face was deeply tanned, not the summer sun brown, but that deep, thoroughly weathered color of someone who'd spent her whole life outdoors. Her hands, as I saw them later, well, I'll come to that, were rough as tree bark, scarred white because she worked with the animals every day, with ropes, with leather, with the raw force of the earth. But her eyes were gentle, gray-green like alpine water, and when she looked at her cattle, there was such affection in them that you understood this was her life, and it was enough. The train didn't lose much speed. We were on a proper railway line after all, not a country path. But I noticed the conductor pass my window and look out too. Even she, who'd certainly traveled this route 100 times, stopped and looked. The alpine descent isn't simply work, it's a ceremony, a ritual that shows these mountain people still breathe with the seasons, aren't entirely dependent yet on trains and machines. There's still another way of living, and Margarita was living proof of it. What was interesting was that the train and the cattle met each other several times on the route. We traveled ahead, but then at Bad Reichenhall, I had to wait an hour for another train, and I stepped out onto the platform. And who came past? Margarita and her herd. They were coming from the other direction, down from the Alp, at just the right time to cross the railway crossing. The crossing barriers came down, the lights blinked red, and the cattle, most of them, remained calm and waited. The smell of alpine herbs and stable air rose to my nose. Only 2 or 3 young animals became nervous, but Margarita calmed them with a few words and gestures, with a hand that passed gently across their necks. That was mastery. That was a life so closely connected with nature that fear cannot exist, only understanding. I stepped toward her, perhaps impolitely, interrupting someone in their work, but she smiled as if she'd been expecting me. "Yes," she said. "You're from the train, aren't you? I saw it in your eyes." We talked perhaps 10 minutes, while the cattle waited patiently. She told me about the Alp, about this year, about a calf born in summer that was particularly strong. She told me about the other dairymaids and dairymen up there, a dozen people in total, who ran the cheese operation all summer, cared for the animals, tended the meadows. And in autumn, she said, comes this day, this one day, when we bring everything down into the valley, and the next chapter begins. The barrier went up again, and Margarita had to move on. But before she left, she gave me a tip. "You like trains," she said. "So sometime ride from Freilassing to Traunstein on the Walchensee Railway. Up there, in autumn, you see the whole other side of the mountains, the wild sides, where even the railway doesn't go, and everything still looks the way it did 100 years ago." I remembered that, and one day I'll do it. But on that day, on the journey from Berchtesgaden to Freilassing, Margarita was my story, and she was more than enough. I watched as she swung herself back onto her horse with the skill of someone who'd spent her whole life riding. and the cattle began to move again. Do you know why I'm telling you this? Not because it's exciting or dramatic, but because it's real. Because it shows that there are still people who live with the seasons, who speak to their animals as if they were family, who master a craft that's centuries old. Margareta was old, but she wasn't tired. She was a dairymaid, a herdswoman, a craftsperson, a master of her trade. And every spring she drove her herd back up to the Alp, and every autumn she drove them back down, flowers on the horns, bells around the necks, and the train passed by like a modern dream. Close your eyes now. Imagine you're sitting in this compartment, and outside it's no longer meadows and mountainsides passing, but your own life. The work of the day falls from you like snow from the rocks. Your muscles grow heavy and warm. And if you still hear anything, you hear only the bells around the cattle's necks. Each bell a note, together a song that pulls you down into sleep, into the deep, dark rest where your dreams become your home too. The journey from Leipzig to Berlin on a spring day. The sky was still grey, but the air had that particular smell you find only in spring, somewhere between snow not quite gone and green preparing to grow. I was sitting by my window reading an old book, one I'd read many times before, and the text scarcely registered anymore. The story of a man trying to understand his life. Then my compartment door opened, and a young woman entered. No, not girl, a young woman, perhaps barely 20 or 21, with a long black cello case that she set down so carefully as though it were made of glass, as though one wrong grip, one wrong movement could break something inside it. She sat across from me, and I noticed at once that her hands were trembling, but only slightly, very slightly, barely visible to anyone not looking closely. She pressed them between her knees, but within seconds she gave it up. It didn't work, and she knew it. She laid them on her lap instead, where they lay like two small birds that don't know where to fly or have just returned from a long flight. She was nervous. You could see it not just in her hands, but in the way she held her whole body, too stiffly, too attentively. Her right heel rose and fell rhythmically, faster than the rattle of the train, as though she could drive time forward if she just bounced her foot fast enough. And again, she had to reach over to the cello case to touch it, press it gently, as though reassuring herself that it was still there, that it hadn't suddenly vanished without a trace. I tried to focus on my book again, but the words made no sense anymore. I found myself watching her, not intrusively, but the way you glance at someone when you think they don't notice. After a while, she leaned her head against the window, but her eyes stayed open, restless, jumping from point to point, from the window to the case, from the case to her hands, from her hands to me. And whenever our eyes met, she looked quickly away. I cleared my throat very quietly and asked whether the case didn't need an airplane ticket. It was a joke, a silly joke, but she understood and laughed, just briefly, just a breath of laughter. And suddenly she began to talk. She was on her way to an audition, she said. Her first real audition for an orchestra, not in Leipzig, not in a small hall, but something big, something that mattered. She was a cellist, had been playing for many years, but this time it was different. She could feel it. She told me about music school, about her teacher, an old gentleman with grey hair and hands that never stayed still anymore. About the nights she'd practiced the same passages over and over until her fingers hurt. Not superficially, but deep in the tendons. And her thoughts went nowhere except into that one Bach phrase. That one phrase with all its tiny delays and accelerations, which she was to play today in a city she didn't know, in front of people who would judge her. And then, in the middle of her sentence, she stopped and stared at me, really at me, not past me, but directly into my eyes. And she asked, "Do you think you can feel it when you're in the right place?" Her voice was quiet, but not uncertain. It was a real question, you understand, not something that needed a simple answer, not yes or no, but something deeper. I opened my mouth, but no words came. How was I to answer? I don't know her. I know nothing about her except that she's traveling to Berlin with a cello, and that her question hung in the silence of the compartment, like smoke you can't remove from the air. She didn't wait for my answer. She leaned back again, and her heel rose and fell again, faster now than before. Her hand wandered once more to the case. She murmured something to herself, something in German or perhaps a Bach phrase I couldn't quite understand. The train traveled on, and the landscape grew greener. I looked from my window across the fields at villages that rushed past, and her question still hovered in the air, unanswered, unresolved. Her eyes eventually grew heavy, and I saw her fall asleep. Her head dropped to the side, and her hair fell across her cheek. She slept without moving, and for a moment she seemed not nervous anymore, but simply young and exhausted, as though all the years of practice, all the nights had suddenly fallen away from her. I looked at her and thought about her question. Do you think you can feel it when you're in the right place? The answer didn't come to me. Perhaps there isn't one. Or perhaps the answer is so personal that each person must find it themselves, in silence, in the moment when it matters. I wanted to help her, wanted to tell her that the answer lies within her, in the cello, in her hands. But it wasn't my place to answer. The question was hers alone. I fell asleep myself, my book still in my hand, and when I woke, we were nearly in Berlin. She was gone. Only her seat remained, and the finest cloud of something that smelled of tree resin, of rosin, of all those hours her fingers had pressed on strings. Her question stayed with me, unanswered, and I carried it like a small stone in my pocket, which I took out from time to time and examined, without knowing where it belonged.